Who's having a good day today? Woo woo! Don't forget, we have the band tonight, the Spasmatics from 6 to 10. They're a hoot. They're an 80s cover band. And you're allowed to invite friends. Have them come back. We got the whole lot that's going to be set up, drinks, band, 80s party. Hope you all will stay. But without further ado, I am so proud to introduce you to Paul DeBevick. He is the Chief Research Officer for Eyeline Studios, powered by Netflix. He said I could say, powered by Netflix. Paul DeBevick is Chief Research Officer at Netflix Eyeline Studios. He's the adjunct research professor at the University of Southern California and a governor of the visual effects branch of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. Paul's work in photogrammetry, high dynamic range, image-based lighting, photoreal digital characters, and virtual production was recently recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Emmy Award and has contributed to the Oscar-winning visual effects in The Matrix, Spider-Man 2, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Avatar, Gravity, Ex Machina, The Jungle Book, and Blade Runner 2049. Just little projects. How do you have a Lifetime Achievement? You're not even that old. Paul DeBevick.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for that introduction, and also thank you for an amazing virtual production summit. I'm so excited to have a chance to share some of this work that I've done with some colleagues at Netflix and at Eyeline Studios that we call Magenta Greenscreen. Oh, I'm going to use my mic. Sorry. I'm so excited to be able to talk about some of the work that I've done with Dima Smirnov, Chloe Legendre, Shuming Yu, and at Eyeline Studios and at Netflix on this technique that we've come up with to try to get good ground truth training data for natural image matting algorithms, and we call it Magenta Greenscreen. So this talk is going to be about compositing. And if we take a look here, the kind of a goal that you would like is, you might have an image and you want to get a good alpha channel for it because you want to put it onto a new background. And if the background is already a complicated background like you see on the left, then getting the alpha channel for it is a natural image matting problem. And the alpha channel generally is shown in this way where 0 means that's all background, 1 means it's all foreground element or actor. And the thing that's really important is all of those values in between, where the partial value is telling you about the transparency that you might have of the hair, due to motion blur, due to image defocus, due to actually maybe even holding a semi-transparent object. And if you want to put on a new background, you have to have that partial coverage on the new background for it to look accurate. And if you don't get it right, it's actually pretty noticeable. For some reason, edges of stuff are pretty perceptually relevant to folks, and even if it's whizzing by in a visual effects shot, if you see matte lines or if you see the edges are too hard relative to the motion of the rest of the scene, it doesn't look particularly realistic. So we'd love to have good ways of getting those. The real goal is actually not just to get the alpha channel, but you also have to reconstruct the foreground element. You have to figure out what the person would look like if the background wasn't there, because in those partially transparent little edges that you get, if you pull background along with you, then it's going to end up in your final result, and you don't want that to be part of the scene. So what we're showing this as is like alpha times foreground, which means it's a pre-multiplied alpha element. It just basically means it's your foreground element seen against black. And something that you have to remember is you don't end up having to multiply that by alpha again, because it's already on black. It already has those edges the way that we want to see it, and we just want to add it onto the background if we've created a hole in the background to put the actor into. And we create a hole in the background by using actually the inverse of the alpha channel, sometimes called a holdout matte. And you want to multiply that against the background. That creates an area of black where you can then just add your foreground element on top of, and that will hopefully make a nice composite that we're going to call with the letter C. So all that can be expressed mathematically using the matting equations. These are how they were written by Porter and Duff something like 40 years ago. And the problem with this is that if you just start with a single image of the actor already on a background, and you want to figure out the RGB color of the foreground and the RGB color of the background and the alpha value, you're trying to figure out 7 numbers from a single RGB value. And even if you've shot a clean plate, so you already know what the background is, then you end up with still needing to know the foreground red, the foreground green, the foreground blue. and alpha from only 3 observations there on the left. So we have this fundamental problem of trying to record 4 channels of data, or wanting to get 4 channels of data, and we typically only have a 3-channel camera. So we're wondering, is there a way that we might be able to do that using somehow machine learning? Well, people actually have been working on that, and there's a lot of very interesting papers going on at the Computer Vision Pattern Recognition Conference, the SIGGRAPH conference. There's some nice work coming up even this next week in doing matting algorithms as well. And you can kind of see what the results look like here, and they're getting better and better. And some of these are even getting put into software that you can use for keying. They're not production ready, generally speaking. You wouldn't just say like, okay, we're totally ready for this stuff, and we don't even think about whether the alpha channel is going to be good enough. We're probably going to have to still tweak it a little bit with some additional compositing work. And it's possible that one of the reasons for that is that the training data for these algorithms actually came from imperfectly keyed image data sets. So this is the VideoMat 240K data set, which was put online, and a lot of these academic publications train on this kind of compositing data. And if you actually go and look at some of these images, there's 240,000 frames of data. It was originally shot on green screen and then just run through automated keying algorithms. And unfortunately, they didn't do a good job of isolating the foreground element. That's not showing alpha times foreground on black. It's brought a lot of that white background around in the edge, and it's, I guess, despilled it so the green edges turn into white. But that's not a good foreground element. And the alpha channels aren't super great either. They're a little bit inconsistent in terms of what kind of transparencies they figure out. They tend not to have good motion blur on them. A lot of the data wasn't even shot with motion blur. And so it would be a lot more interesting to see how well these algorithms can do if they were trained on good ground truth alpha channels. So that's sort of our goal, is to try to figure out a pretty much automated way so we can get hundreds of thousands of frames of actors seen on black with a ground truth alpha channel. And the idea that we're going to talk about is something that we call Magenta Greenscreen. And the basic idea is that we'll film actors on green screen. That's a good leg up if you're trying to do compositing. But the green channel of an actor seen on green screen doesn't just give you your matte, because the actor also is reflecting green light, and the pixel values aren't like 1 for the background and 0 for the foreground. That you have to kind of figure out how to get rid of the actor out of the green screen, and that's the general keying problem. That's that extra degree of freedom that's in there. So our thought was, well, in a virtual production stage, you're surrounded by RGB LEDs. Why don't you just turn off all the green light on the actor, keep the green screen back there, and now the green channel of your image is exactly the inverse of the alpha channel without doing any computation or keying or anything like that. You just, and that's already reversed it into alpha, but that's just literally recorded in high quality on set. You don't have to do anything particularly complicated there. The problem is, of course, then you end up with this image of the actors lit by magenta light, only red and blue, and that's going to look weird as a foreground element. So somehow we have to restore the green channel, and that's where we put in a light dusting of machine learning. We take some images of the actors, like in rehearsal, before we turn off the green light on them, and we have a machine learning algorithm restore the green channel, and it turns out that just totally works. So we don't need to insert the green channel. We can figure that out with the ML technique. And the actual way that this looks on set, it's not as extreme as you see on the left there. The image there on the left with the actors on green, we've already dematrixed it so that the red, green, and blue channels correspond to the response under the red, green, and blue LEDs. So everything looks super saturated. On set, things look a little bit more like they are on the right, where it's more like a pink light than a super saturated magenta. However, you don't necessarily want to be in that light all day, so we can just hide that from the actors using a time multiplexing technique. So we just rapidly go from magenta green to green magenta. If you do that fast enough, it's above the flicker fusion rate, and it doesn't bother anybody, and the cameras just shoot an exposure that only picks out the frames that you actually need. So you can do it that way. So going forward and looking at kind of what we're doing, the fundamental problem is that, as I said, we really want to get 4 channels of data but we have a camera sensor that only shoots 3 channels of information. And there's various kinds of keying techniques that are out there that try to reconstruct that, but they're all somewhat manual. And if you just look at these 4 channels that we want, we say we only get to choose 3 of them, and the last one we're going to have to make up somehow. You probably wouldn't naturally just choose the first 3, because that last one, the alpha, is the one that looks different from everything else. So given that alpha channels are really important, maybe we should actually pay attention and shoot that, and then figure out how to restore color appropriately with just the other 2 channels. And there's been a couple of techniques actually that make a different approach, where you say, well, you know what, we're going to go and design some special hardware system, and we'll actually record all 4 channels. We'll get red and green and blue and alpha all at the same time. And one of those is infrared matting. And let's see here. I don't know if this video is going to load because it's coming over the internet. We have somewhat interesting Wi-Fi here, but let's give it a shot. And there we go. So this is kind of in the blast from the past category. But this was our SIGGRAPH 2002 paper, where we thought it would be neat to put together a system where we surrounded the actors with colorful LEDs and displayed images of the environment that we're supposed to be filming them under, so that they'd be lit right for that environment. And we did that with 156 of these RGB LEDs that we were controlling using a real-time system. And that would produce the lighting on the actor. But since we were concerned, since LED panels wouldn't become available for another 2 years, we would need to do some compositing, because we wouldn't have dense enough panels behind to just do an in-camera background. So we put together that beam splitter system, and there's 2 cameras. One of them's color, one of them's infrared, which is really just a black and white camera that's panchromatic. And we block the visible light from that. And behind the actors, we put infrared cloth lit by kind of infrared LEDs. So the actors, basically, the color camera sees that actor on black, which is you want. And then if you look here, this is what the infrared camera sees in just a second. Boom. And we went to some effort to synchronize the 2 cameras. And if you get a clean plate of that infrared image, that's the clean plate. If you divide that out of all of the footage you have and do that in linear space, then it gives you pretty much your holdout matte, just photographed. Again, you don't have to do any keying algorithms. If you make sure the 2 images are in alignment, then you can composite your actor into your background environment. And so that particular example was done using an HDRI map as the environment. And if you watch the rest of the video, we do a couple of CGI environments and try to have actors lit interactively with light from some 3-dimensional scenes. And infrared compositing actually is also related to a much earlier technique that was pretty fun, and I'm a huge fan of, called sodium vapor matting. And in this technique, which was actually used in a number of films by filmmakers kind of in the 1960s, they would reuse a 3-strip Technicolor film camera, which you didn't really need once we invented color film. We didn't need to run 3 strips of black and white film through a camera to get color, but these were still sitting around. And someone had the idea, I think it was even Petro Vlahos, to run 1 strip of black and white film in to get the matte and a strip of color film to get the color. And the question is, how do you get the matte? Well, people actually had experimented with infrared for your matte back as early as the 1940s. Leonard Pickley, I think, is the first reference I found from 1946. But the problem is that lenses on cameras aren't really designed to get the near infrared light to the same place in the film as they get the red and the green and the blue light. So essentially there's like really bad chromatic aberration effectively for infrared. And the alpha channel image you got would be too big for the subject. And they'd have to reprint the alpha channel on the infrared a little smaller so that it would match with the element. Now there's a generation loss, and in fact, we kind of lost the benefit of doing it this way. So the brilliant idea was to use this special yellow light, low pressure sodium vapor light, which happens to be a very specific wavelength of yellow. It's actually 2 wavelengths extremely close together, and they're both right around within a nanometer of 589 nanometers. So it's a particular color of orangish yellow. They used to use it in like tunnels that you drive through because it was the least expensive lumens per watt that you could get. And nowadays LED blows away, so we have normal lights in our tunnels. But you'd go in there and like all the cars would turn exactly the same color. Like you can't see color under this illumination. You can only see shades of exactly that one wavelength. And because it's one wavelength, you can use optical filters to either block it with a notch reject filter that lets the whole rainbow in except 589 nanometers in a little range around it, and a bandpass filter that only selects for the sodium vapor light. And so actors would act in front of a yellow screen, and this Technicolor camera would be outfitted with additional different filters than it had before, one that selects for sodium vapor, one that selects for everything else. And there's enough other yellow wavelengths around 589 that you're not blocking, so the visible image still looks pretty normal. Maybe it's ever so slightly greenish or something, so you can fix that in post. And this actually got used in some films that we've seen. So like Dick Van Dyke Dancing with Penguins, not only were the penguins not originally there, but he was in front of a yellow screen so that they could get a really good composite. He has great compositing, great motion blur. In Hitchcock's The Birds, they had to composite a lot of very flappy birds all over a bunch of shots and have the birds look menacingly there, and all of that wing stuff flapping around would not look good with the compositing methods of the day. And so this technique actually got some very convincing visual effects with that too. So those are the two filters that you need to find. It can be a bit of a search for that. I actually did manage to find those two filters, and just for fun, recreated the low pressure sodium vapor matting process in my backyard during COVID. It required 3 different purchases to make the sodium vapor lights, and then those are some LED ones in front. It's a couple of Z cams there and a beam splitter with the 2 filters, and here's my former grad student Chloe Legendre seen simultaneously under visible light through the notch reject filter and the sodium vapor light there, which films a matte. So that looked like it would be super fun. Again though, having to deal with the filters, having to deal with 2 cameras on a beam splitter and lining those images up, ultimately didn't feel like the most practical thing. So the previous technique had basically brought the matte into the middle of the spectrum in yellow, or just kind of between the red and the green channels. And that was a great idea because now the sodium vapor matte is right in the middle of what the lens is designed to actually focus correctly. So it benefited over the infrared matting quite a bit. So we thought, well, how about we'll bring the matte into the middle of the spectrum, right on top of the green, get rid of the green, who needs green, and we'll shoot it that way. So that was our thought with that. So we are still shooting the actors in red and blue, and there's another callback to classic filmmaking technology, which is that for a while people experimented with only shooting 2 channels for color. So there's something called 2-strip Technicolor, where you would basically have one strip of film getting the longer wavelengths, like the oranges and stuff, and the other strip of film getting the shorter wavelengths, like the cyans, and you can save one strip of film that way compared to full color. And it turns out that's actually pretty good for westerns, because if you think about the westerns, what do you have? You have like, the blue sky, that's kind of cyan. You've got the white clouds, that's cyan plus orange. You got the shadows, which are just no light, that's fine. Skin tones, kind of in the orangish range, sort of kind of works. And there's very little out in the classic American West that's either green or purple. So you can kind of make a Western that way, and people did. You could imagine maybe, hey, we could restore the color somehow and make this work. And so that was the thing that we had to figure out to kind of colorize effectively 2-strip Technicolor. But let's go to our setup here. So we're very lucky at Eyeline Studios to have a nice LED volume. It doesn't go 360 degrees around, but it's got some pretty good curved sides there. So we kind of shot sideways in the stage, put our actors in the middle so we could put green in the frustum. Of course, we tried to keep that as limited as possible to get as little green spill as we could. And then we used the rest of the LEDs to show the magenta illumination. And mathematically, if we know that the foreground element on the green channel is 0, our 4 equations turn into 3 equations, and we can solve it without any issues at all. And in fact, you don't need a fancy, expensive virtual production stage to do this too. This is also a thing available for one to do in one's backyard, and a couple of $80 LED ones that you can set to green or red plus blue for magenta, and you can do the setup yourself. And all of our first tests were done just using that low-cost setup. So this is Danielle and Naz, who work with us at Netflix and Eyeline. And they're holding some transparent bottles. One's a little reddish, one's a little bit greenish. And this is how we got them filmed under the magenta green. Now, it would have been convenient for us if we looked at the pixel value of the green pixels once they're filmed by the camera, and it was like 0, 1, 0. And if we looked at the magenta pixels, and there was absolutely no green in them. Unfortunately, cameras are designed to have crosstalk in the sensors. And as a result, when you put pure red on the stage, you don't only get the red channel lit up of your camera. When you put pure green, you don't get just the green channel. And pure blue, you don't get the blue channel. But we're very lucky that in this case, this is bad for color rendition, but it's good for doing this thing, is that since the red, green, and blue LEDs are very narrow spectrally, you can basically, in a 3x3 matrix, get rid of the crosstalk. If it were broader spectrum illumination sources, that wouldn't work as well, but it works pretty darn well on a virtual production stage, and you can kind of purify the red and the green and the blue channels that way. And there's a graph of where our red, green, and blue spectra are. And you can see that the blue LED, the dotted line on the left there, overlaps the blue and the green reflectance, and the green touches red and blue a little bit, and then the red touches green a little bit. The biggest one, though, is of course the blue hitting the green in that case. But we can basically fix that, and then we can make this look even more colorful. It's great that we're actually showing this on an LED screen. This is like perfect. This is exactly what we shot. If we pull the channels apart, the red and blue channels are on the left, and then the green channel, which we've now just made monochrome and inverted, is your alpha channel. That's all you had to do. That's all ready to go. And the next thing you got to do is think about, how do we colorize this? So the quickest and least expensive way to think about colorizing your red and green footage actually is you can just create a green channel by averaging the red and the blue channels together. And in fact, you can do a linear combination of them where you weight one differently. And it turns out if you weight toward red or toward blue a little bit more, you can get any particular person's range of skin tones to work out. But you'll notice that their shirts are a little less colorful than they actually should be there. So that could be a real-time way to visualize it on set. So at least white things look white, black things look black, and green and purple things will end up looking gray at that point. But to do it a bit better, let's turn to machine learning, where we have some sort of network that we want to have the input to the network be the red and blue channels of an image, and the output's the green channel of the image. And then you can put them all back together and make a nice colorful image. And turns out there's actually lots of neural networks that have been trained to colorize images actually for a harder problem, which is colorizing black and white to color. So if you've got a black and white image, you've got one color channel, and then you need to generate it into 3. So you're kind of making up 2 color channels, and you've got one. We've already got 2 color channels, we just need to make up one more. And that's an easier problem. These are a couple of image colorization algorithms that do okay, but there's a bit of ambiguity. We thought that since we have our actors around, maybe we'll film a rehearsal take of the actors where we don't turn off the green light, we just leave it black in the background. So we get a rehearsal take that'll show the network what these actors are supposed to look like. They're not doing exactly what they're gonna do when we actually shoot the real take, but it gives you training data, because every single one of these frames here, you can use its red and blue channels as training with a known green channel. That's what it's supposed to be. So you train your network with that. And it turns out that works really, really well. So we didn't have a green channel for these folks, and machine learning made one up, and it's pretty good. So there's our foreground element. And let's see what we can do next. We'll take our alpha as a holdout matte, we'll put them on a new background, And there's a pretty good composite. And we can compare it to what they look like on another background. And then I think it'll show in a moment kind of a ground truth comparison. Turns out we're on an LED volume when we're shooting all this. So we can actually just put that image that we want to be in the background, just put it on the LEDs. So on the right, that's filmed as an in-camera visual effect with no magenta green trickery. And on the left is the result of shooting at magenta green, recolorizing the green, and then using the alpha from that to composite onto the stage here. So we'll play that one more time. So there's the left. It's using magenta green. The right is the actual ground truth comparison. And they're pretty close. And here's a close-up with some of that difficult blonde hair situation. Danielle actually, I didn't even ask her to wear a green dress. She showed up with a green dress. And that would normally, be not the best thing for a green screen. I didn't know if our stuff was going to work either, but it worked. So the network was happy to restore green from the way that it showed up on the camera. And we got a decent composite for that at least. And let's see, this is kind of showing frame by frame for some of that. We probably could have done a better lighting match to that particular environment, but that's what we had with our stage at the time. Oh, okay. Thanks. I'm really worried because there's people in this room that are way better at looking at composites than I am, and I'm totally speaking out of turn at this point. But so let's see here. Alpha channels actually should be full color, right? I mean, if you happen to be holding like a transparent red bottle or transparent green bottle, your alpha channel shouldn't be just one channel, it should be full color, right? You actually, if you film training data of the alpha, so what you would do is you actually film another rehearsal of the actors where you turn off all the light on them, which could be a little dangerous, hopefully they can see where they're going, and you just light them from behind with white light, then you can get a 3-channel alpha as your training data. And then you can actually colorize your alpha channel too. So why not have an alpha channel that actually has the right colors for the bottles there, if that's important to you, if that's what your scene needs. And then you actually get a somewhat better composite for the bottles there. So on the right, hopefully not too much of that's behind everything else that's in front of the screens here, but the bottle's a little bit more green there because the transmission as well as the reflection is showing the green alpha. Now you don't have to do it with magenta and green. You can actually pick any color channel to use as your alpha and then have to restore. And we picked green just because green screen's common. I think green screen's common mostly in the digital world because you get the most pixels in your green channel, right? That's half of your pixels on a Bayer pattern versus 1/4 of them for red or blue. But you don't have to do magenta green screen. You can also do cyan red screen or yellow blue screen. And we did some yellow blue screen. It was actually nice. Actually, somewhat more pleasing light to be under. And here we're having to colorize the blue channel way at the end of the spectrum. We thought that would be harder to colorize, maybe because you're using red and green to predict blue, and blue's off at the side of them instead of using red and blue to predict green, which is in the middle of them spectrally. As far as I can tell, it worked just as well. So maybe at that point, I kind of said, oh, we should just call it the yellow blue screen paper, but it was like too late. We'd already submitted it. So the thing is that it would be nice actually if the lighting looked normal to everybody on set instead of these strong cues. It came up earlier that being on a green screen just behind you all day can be annoying. So imagine having a big strong hue in front of you all the time. And so we'll see if this video wants to play, but we have kind of our second blast from the past because we're going to try to sneak some little patterns into what we're doing here. So this was the SIGGRAPH 2005 paper where we'd added a bunch of white LEDs to our light stage 3.5 system. And we had enough money to buy one phantom camera, which would shoot up to about, some of this was shot at 4,000 frames per second. And so the idea was that we would rapidly go and shoot every possible lighting direction for every frame of film. So why not for every frame of film get 180 lighting passes on your actor, because you can do a lot of relighting. And one of our lighting passes sneaked in this little matte frame in the sequence. So we turned off all the light on the actor, threw light onto this gray board behind the actor. And so in amongst all the other frames that we're shooting, we get an alpha channel without having to do much complication on the keying. And I think the next shot's basically going to kind of show a collage of all of the images that we shoot at frame rate. And the whole idea is like you run through this fast enough that it doesn't drive people batty. And that's where we're going at as high a frame rate as we were. And then you can relight in post and put a different background in post. You can also mix and match your lighting conditions and show the same performance lit by your favorite HDRI map just by taking linear combinations of all your lighting passes. And so the thought would be that maybe if we thought of this pattern as this map pattern as something that we're just trying to hide in the sequence, we can make it invisible to the actors. And there's some other work we had to do to like restore the motion blur that you didn't get, so it looked like you just had a 180 shutter. Using kind of that as some inspiration, we thought, well, why don't we just rapidly switch between magenta green and green magenta, and then over time, it's basically they're lit with neutral light from the front and neutral light from the back, and maybe that'll look okay. Now the problem is that if you switch, like it's good, normally we shoot with a 180 shutter, so the other 180 degrees is kind of available for stuff to do. So that's where we could put the switched lighting in. But if you switch at, effectively it starts the sequence over 24 times per second, instant headache for everybody. It's still above the frequency that there's been any documented case of photosensitive epilepsy causing any problems, but it's annoying to be under. So you don't want stuff flashing at 24, we've all seen that. You don't even really want stuff to be flashing at 48, to be honest, right? I mean, that's almost like PAL television from the 80s, right, which was 50, and that wasn't great. 48's not even quite that good. 72 is pretty good, right? People remember when we had like your Mac CRT and you set the refresh rate to 72 and it looked pretty nice. So we can do 72, and actually, so what we do is we do magenta green for 144th of a second, then we switch it to green magenta for 144th of a second, and then do magenta green, green magenta, magenta green, green magenta. Now, not everybody wants to film their footage at 144 frames per second. The Phantom cameras have no problem with that. A lot of cameras can do it, but you don't need to. What you can do is just have your camera shoot at 24 frames per second and just pick out every sixth frame, and then you'll get magenta green at 24 frames per second. Or you can set it to 48 frames per second with at 48, a 120 shutter, and then you can pick out every third frame, and then you actually get alternating frames of magenta green, green magenta, magenta green, green magenta, and then the sequence kind of self-documents itself as to how to colorize it. And so the nice thing is when you're actually running that at 144, the way that we shot a lot of this stuff, the way that it looks to people on set pretty much is like this. And it's pretty good. Now, if you start shaking your hand back and forth, you can see little magenta green rainbows. But generally speaking, I found it to be just fine. I was on it for a while. Nobody seemed to complain. And then you pick out the frames. So like this next film is very much slowed down of what's actually happening, because that's actually happening at 144 frames per second. So you can kind of hide it from folks if you don't want to feel the colorful light. And here's some results done in that form. Now in this case here, we're kind of just naively using magenta green and green magenta frames that don't line up with each other. You can also fix that with some optical flow. And we found that still, even if you've shot magenta green right next to green magenta a 48th of a second later, it's still better for your final result to just take the magenta green and colorize it rather than try to pull the green that's temporally distant from it by a 48th of a second. You get a better result. Watching this a couple of times now, I finally caught the colorization algorithm blowing it for a moment. And it's kind of fun what happens. So I handed an almost identical red bottle and green bottle in shape to both people. And the worry is that the algorithm would confuse the red bottle with the green bottle. Mostly it doesn't, but if you look at Danielle, who's holding the green bottle, at some point she passes it in front of the red patch of her dress, and a little bit of that red light comes through the green bottle, and the network, since that probably wasn't in any of the training data of her holding it in exactly that position, guesses that it's the red bottle for a few frames, and the bottle turns red. So this is the worst error that we've seen so far. I'll play it again. So keep your eye on the green bottle from Danielle there. So at least shows that it's doing something there. So again, like if you do shoot with the shorter shutter speed, then you do have to add some motion blur. Turns out motion blur is not that hard to add. So we could still get good training data, even with the time multiplex technique. So I think we're getting toward the end here. Just kind of in summary, I guess like that was our goal, is to be able to come up with alpha channels very reliably. And you could actually use this on set. I mean, it works as described. But really the reason for this is that eventually we could get a large enough set of training data so that we've got ground truth, foreground elements of actors, and their alpha channels, so we can just composite them onto all sorts of different backgrounds, and then tell a matting algorithm that's trying to do this relatively automatically, like, if you were to composite this actor off of this background, here's what their foreground element really should look like, and here's what their alpha channel really should look like, and have that be high quality. And given how successful the algorithms are at figuring things out, I think there's going to be a good chance of that. And it does better than green screen. That's what happened when we ran a normal green screen algorithm on Danielle with her green dress. And the hair's better too. So some future work. Be interesting to see if you could train a generalized model for restoring green without having to have actor-specific data. Every image on the internet is a possible training example of what the green channel should be given what the red and blue channels are. So that would be a fun network to see how good that is. There's also this issue that, of course, we've seen that the LED lighting in virtual production stages has color rendition issues. Well, magenta light is a really, really bad color rendition issue. The RGB light in a virtual production stage, which is missing big parts of the spectrum between red and green and blue, and has the red in a weird place that lights up too much of the red on most people. You could also think about using a machine learning algorithm to colorize that all the way to how you look under broad spectrum illumination, and just fix the color rendition issue of virtual production using a machine learning network. And with that, there's some links. All this is online, the video's online, and Dima, the first author, is going to be talking about this at the DigiPro conference tomorrow, the day before SIGGRAPH. And I think we have time for just a couple questions. Thank you very much. Oh, one more thing, wait. I just wanted to point out my good friend Tram, in honor of this talk. Could you come up just for 1 second here, please? Can I embarrass you? Okay, there we go. Everyone, Tram, thank you. Right, any questions?
Thank you. Hi, nice to see you. I'm Heather McCann. My question for you is based on, I know some people here. For others, let's just say I'm a producer side of the equation. So perhaps the bad guy of the panel that I very much enjoyed that you just moderated. So for me, I have a lot of real world constraints, and I have a lot of real world people with existing expertise who sometimes have been calling me for the last few weeks about Magenta green screen. And they have a lot of, so let's say the DOPs, I'm afraid to talk to the DITs yet. Um, some people have expressed skepticism about actor skin tones and whether their existing expertise is going to serve them? Like, can they drop into this, or is this going to be yet another like thing that isn't easy to do if they aren't already big visual effects green screen DOPs? So I'm curious, what should I say to them?
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. And I think, again, the primary purpose of this is that like we'll run this in our studio to get a bunch of training data so that we can have natural image matting, right? If anybody wants to try using it in production, go ahead. If I make a movie, I will definitely try to use it for a couple of shots just for fun. But the real goal is that we can get pretty much for the first time completely automatically large amounts of ground truth training data with like basically, as good as possible to photograph alpha channels. And what that means for tools built on that is that you should be able to film in a volume with whatever you want on the panel. And if you need to replace that background, there will be no roto that you have to work with. It'll get a great alpha channel that looks just as good as these because we've actually trained a network for what they look like. And that hopefully will offer some flexibility in the process.
I got a quick question for you here, Paul. So, is there anything that you have to do when thinking about if you're not doing this in a volume, if you're doing this like you did in the backyard, exposing on the green screen? Is there anything you have to think about in terms of the exposure of the background compared to your foreground subject? Are you thinking about doing plus stops or minus anything like that that you were experimenting with that could shed some light?
Yeah. Well, I think we pretty much put the green screen part at where a lot of people would. I think we did like 2 stops down from saturating the image or so. And then I guess you want the red and the blue channels on the actors just be well exposed red and blue channels. And just try to get a good exposure for that. We basically just exposed when the actors were lit by the white light and then kept that same exposure when we dropped the green out.
Thank you very much.
We have another question in the back.
Hey, how's it going? Back here, it's Mitch. I'm curious, when you film somebody in a real world location, obviously pulling a depth map from that programmatically would be interpreted one way versus I'm curious if you film somebody on an LED wall like this, would the way that like a machine learning model interpreted that background, like in the case of pulling a depth map, so me standing in a hill versus me standing in front of an LED screen, does that get interpreted, by in a training data set? Does that get interpreted differently?
Well, we're not, recording depth, right? We're just recording, alpha or opacity for this. There are very impressive algorithms out there that are like single image depth estimation. And one of the places those get used is that, if you use some image generator to generate a 2D image, and then you want to animate a little camera move through it, you hallucinate a depth map and then animate through that depth map. And not too bad actually. Over the years, there's been lots of matting techniques proposed where the foreground background separation is recorded using some sort of like time of flight laser scanner, and that is usually fraught with a little bit of difficulty because like the depth imagers tend to be considerably lower resolution than your camera, and your mat needs to be every bit as good as your camera. And also when you get around edges where you need those partial transparent edges, which is really the hard part of matting, the depth cameras don't do very well on those. And you'll even sometimes get depth estimates that are like halfway between your depth and the background's depth, which is not helping anything for that. So again, this was our attempt, like what's the best possible way to get good alpha channels? And that works. If some of the work that we did at Google, where we were using camera arrays to get things we called like multiplane images, kind of a 3D representation of the scene. Those actually got very nice depth and partial transparency because we were solving for volumes of like RGB alpha data out of camera array material. And so, if you want to shoot with a camera array, that might be a good way to go. Do we have Ray Feeney up here?
There's one right here.
We'll do Ray right after.
Hi, Paul. Listening to the questions, even though you said it in words, but those words might not have translated to people who are speaking normal production speak. what you're doing in your target, you're a work in progress to create reference data such that you should be creating or working towards creating a model that allows DPs not to do this, but DPs to just shoot normally with normal lighting or to take existing shots or whatever and use that model to pull a high quality mat.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
this is interim data and a mechanism for you to create a tool, and DPs don't need to light with Magenta or do the flashing or any of the rest of it. If this works, it will then be able to be applied to normal photography to pull a mat without a green screen, just over any background or any existing way people would normally shoot. And
Indeed, yeah.
I'm not sure that that came through to a lot of the people just based on the questions that are being asked.
Yeah,
So
good point. That's absolutely the primary purpose of this. Um, could it be useful in product? There are some production techniques where, like in your background, for example, you'll time multiplex in the frustum, go between green and the content, right? And then you try to capture both of those so that you have a little bit more options later. That if you need to replace it, you did kind of see the shot on green. I could imagine you could also, do a magenta green with that as well if you wanted to avoid having to run, actors lit with full spectrum light on green without having to run that through a keying algorithm. So I could imagine there could be some production uses, but that's not our primary thrust of this.
yeah, the golden thing you're going for is to try to be able to pull mats from material that's not being shot in a mat type environment.
Yeah.
So that's, even though there may be some things here that you could experiment in a matting type environment, that's not your motivation for this.
Absolutely correct. Yes, thank you for that. I think that's a very helpful clarification.
Hi, Paul, it's Callum.
Hi. Oh,
Hi.
hi.
Just a follow-on question, really. A few of us here are lucky enough to have LED volumes. Do you have a sense of the quantity of training data you require to help generalize natural image matting? And is there a kind of way in which other studios can help input with this training data and build a larger data set?
Very, very good question. The most of the times that we've gone off and tried to go and collect training data, we've been advised that you're going to need 1 million images and you're never going to get it. The example I'm thinking of for that was at Google, we had a light stage and we were trying to come up with algorithms to relight people in post, people that have never been to a light stage just from natural images. And we thought if we could get enough people into the light stage, light them from every direction that light can come from, train a model generally of how to turn somebody lit a random way into flat lighting and then from flat lighting into however you want them lit, that you could have a useful tool that way. And people were saying, yeah, maybe 10,000 people and you'll do it. It started working after 17 people. And the final thing that actually shipped in the Google Pixel phone was done on like 70 people. And I don't think we hit film quality with that, but it was basically kind of working. And I think maybe if we reworked it again, maybe with a little bit more data, you can do that. So I think there's a case that a lot of machine learning algorithms do need millions of images, but that's millions of images that were never shot intended for that purpose. And so it kind of has to find what it needed in a big data set of what it's trying to do. And if you have a very specific problem you're trying to solve and you have the wherewithal to go and shoot exactly what you need, maybe it'll figure it out more quickly. So if it's colorization, if you have a 10-second clip of people doing what you want under white light, that's more than enough to train the green channel for that. That's not very much training data. In fact, it almost works if you just have one image of them standing there and it can kind of figure it out from that. So yet to be seen. We're definitely going to look at movies and see like all the shots where, okay, we need close-ups, we need medium shots, we need wide shots. You can augment training data as well, right? So anytime we have somebody in a static pose shot with this technique, we can also generate training data that would show them under various forms of motion blur, because you can just digitally motion blur the alpha in the foreground, put that on, and then you also have a new piece of training data. So hopefully with a tractable amount of data, we'll be able to get some good results. And that's something you'd like to help with, and we should talk.
We have
Super interesting.
time
Thank
for
you.
one more question back here.
I'm an old camper, and I've probably gone grey from doing roto, etc. But I'm the one who yelled out, "Thank you." But I used to love back in the day of film was blue was always my preference. I used to prefer blue out of the green. Will this change your whole theory between blue and green? Because obviously the green dress will make a difference. That's all.
Yeah, well, we did it with blue as the background color, and from what I could tell, it worked just as well. Um, doing it really looking very closely at full 4K resolution to see if the matte edges are as good recorded with a blue channel than a green channel. Probably not quite as good, but um, you have options for how to do it. And again, the eventual goal, as Ray said, is like, well, we'll have an algorithm that means you don't have to put anything behind people, and it'll just get a really high quality mount right off the bat because we've got good training data for that. Thank you very much. All right, I
Great.
think that's the end
Thank
of our
you so
session.
much.
Thank you.
So everyone, we're going to adjust the stage. That classic car that you saw outside, we're going to be bringing